Hey, how's it going? My name is Ben Van Houw, and I work at the Writing Center. I'm also graduating with an MFA in screenwriting. So I wanted to record this little webinar to help with screenplay formatting, specifically dialogue, before I graduated. So we have some other webinars about scene headings, narrative description. I really wanted to focus on the ins and outs of dialogue, namely how to write character cues, parenthetical directions, and the speech or dialogue itself. This is all keeping in mind that the correct screenplay formatting just relies on consistency and readability to make sure that whatever you write is as easy to digest and understand as possible. So let's start by talking about, clear scene headings and concrete narrative descriptions, because those, of course, bring the reader into the world of the story. They help us know what it looks like, what it sounds like. But I really think that dialogue is what keeps us invested in the story. It's the human element. We watch TV shows or movies to see people in conflict and to see words in conflict. So to make that really pop off the page, you have to make sure that your formatting is correct. If you look at this example, you can see with A, that's the character cue. So it's centered in all caps. B, that's the parenthetical. And then C, that's the actual dialogue or speech. And we'll go into the nitty-gritty with each of these, starting with character cues. This is also known as the character name, the character caption, the character slug. This part of the dialogue is always in all caps. Keep in mind that a character should be referred to by the same character cue throughout the script, so their name wouldn't change in the character cue, with rare exceptions. So maybe they can be referred to in speech through with a variety of names. They can have nicknames, but just as long as that does not change the actual character cue. So what if you have a character with maybe two names, or their name changes at some point throughout the script, say from Jack to John? One option is to refer to them as Jack until the switch, and then you can write Jack/John, or John and then Jack in parentheses after the name change. Maybe you want to slowly kind of introduce a character and you don't want them to be revealed yet. Well, you could write man or woman or person until they are revealed to be Jack or John, and then you would switch and then use that name as their character cue. Maybe you have a story that spans over a lifetime. In that case, you could write young Jane Doe, and then present just Jane Doe, and then older Jane Doe, especially if the actor will change between all three of these. It also helps clarify flash forwards or flashbacks. If we know that they're young, then we know that, okay, we might be in a flashback right now. Also, keeping in mind if someone is off screen. So this signifies when they are not in the camera frame, maybe they're in the room. We hear them, but we do not see them. In that case, you'd write OS next to the character cue. And then maybe that's a way of playing with the tension. If a character's on screen seeing something that we as an audience do not see, you would write the other voice as off screen. That's a bit different from the voiceover or VO. Maybe a voice is coming through a phone or a radio and we hear it, and that also means that they're not in the room necessarily. So you would mark that with VO next to the character cue. Keeping in mind that narration of any kind would be considered a voiceover. So moving on to parenthetical direction. So if we look at this example from Uncut Gems, we have two here where it signifies who the character is speaking to, who they're looking at. That's a great use of parentheticals to make it more specific and clarify what's happening in the scene. So this is also known as the actor's direction, the personal direction. These are usually put between the character cue and the actual speech. They suggest the subtext or the attitude of the character, how they're feeling, certain emotions, who they're talking to. Just something to keep in mind is you want to use them kind of moderately, because you want to give the actor freedom to interpret some of the lines and to play out the scene as they see fit. So you don't want each line of dialogue to have a parenthetical or an emotion attached to it. That feels like overkill. So when you have parentheticals for a certain action or a direction, this can help us know who the character is speaking to. Just keep in mind that if the line is, 2 or 3 lines, you would just move that to an action line. You wouldn't put that in a parenthetical. Also keep in mind that you don't want to describe another character's action in the dialogue block of a different character. You would again just put that in an action line. So something to keep in mind is the word beats. This is a term that's often used in screenwriting, but it's a little ambiguous because it means several different things. So a beat could mean, a theatrical term that shows like a pause, action. It could also mean a small unit of action in a scene, or it could refer to something like a beat sheet, where you write the important events or twists or turning points in a script in your outline. So it's a little confusing because it means several different things in the realm of screenwriting. Sometimes people put in parentheses beat when they indicate a pause while someone's speaking. But something to keep in mind is that that's kind of boring and a little non-specific. So you want to refrain from writing a beat or a pause in your writing because that can always be replaced with an action or an emotion that takes up the same amount of time. Instead of saying a beat, you could have a character sigh or slump over or, rub their forehead, anything else that would indicate a pause, but also show an emotion. Something to keep in mind when you write beat in parentheticals, thinking, how can I replace this with something better? So moving on to speech. If we look at this example from Atlanta, we have some examples of ellipses or dashes. You can use these throughout your speech just to show emotion, who's talking over each other, if they're trailing off. So with interruptions, you'd put those 2 dash marks, just keeping in mind that the next line of speech from the second character would not start with the dashes, just before it would end with the dashes, if they're interrupting. So if you want to have a character trail off, you can end their speech with ... And if another character finishes the first character sentence, you can start the second character speech with ... All right. Look at that example. This can convey some of the emotion, heighten emotion if people are interrupting each other a lot. But again, like parentheticals, you kind of want to use it sparingly. You don't want people interrupting each other too much because we want characters to finish their thoughts so we get what's going on in their head. You could also have dual dialogue. If 2 characters are talking simultaneously or speaking over each other, you can have them formatted side by side, right next to each other, so that we understand that that's happening. If they're saying different things at the same time, that's a great formatting trick to have them right next to each other. This is something that's often used in, we showed the Safdie brothers film. That happens in a lot of their films, as well as Robert Altman, multiple characters speaking at once. If you want to have a character speaking in a foreign language, you can write that dialogue out in the spoken language, or you could add a parenthetical under the character's name saying something like in Spanish. If the entire scene is in another language, you can note this in the actual scene description. I've also seen people write the foreign language in italics and indicate in the action line, Spanish is in italics. Whatever you think would be the clearest way to convey that. So, something to keep in mind with phone conversation. If an audience can't see the other person on the phone or hear the other person on the phone, then we would just handle it like any other dialogue you would. So we just hear one side of the conversation, as in this example from Atlanta. We would only hear Bibby talking. We would know they're speaking into the phone, but we'd only hear their dialogue. If you have a phone conversation where we don't see the other person, but we hear them, Then you could have voiceover written. And then the dialogue could say, and in this example, it says off screen, which could also work, but voiceover might be a little bit clearer. We're hearing this come through the phone, right? So making that clear. And then in the action line, it even says the voice of Arno is audible via speakerphone, right? So making that clear for the reader. And then if we see and hear the other person on the phone, then you can cut between both sides of the conversation using an intercut. So you could establish the locations of each character jointly in a single master scene heading, such as intercut, Jean's car or Jen's car, Max's kitchen. And then we get an idea like, oh, there's two locations and they're intercut. Or you could establish the locations separately and then join them together. First, we have interior Jen's car, some action line, and then interior Max's kitchen, some action, and then we write intercut telephone conversation. So we understand that those two scenes are now conjoined. Maybe you have some characters sending emails or text messages. There are multiple ways to do this. I think if you're just consistent and clear, you can try different methods. So maybe you have it so that you have, someone pulling out a phone, starts to text, and then we say something like to Sofina, and then the actual text, and then from Sofina. So we have an understanding, okay, this dialogue is not actually dialogue, it's a text message. So some other things to keep in mind is you want to refrain from using all caps, bold, or italics in dialogue. That can be a bit confusing. The best approach might be just underscoring a word if you want to emphasize it. I've seen italics from time to time as well when you really want to emphasize a word or stress a word, but that can be a little bit confusing as well. So underscore might be the best approach. You want to avoid using symbols or abbreviations. If you have initialisms present in the dialogue, for example, FBI, you want it written out with dashes so it's clear that each letter should be spoken by the actor. So if you want, something where they pronounce something as a word, such as NASA or UNICEF, you obviously wouldn't use those dashes. You wouldn't add hyphens to the acronyms. Right. Something to keep in mind is maybe something is being read by an actor. So you can put quotation marks around whatever is being read. So you imply they're reading the work of someone else, they're reading a text or a book. And then in parentheses, you can put something like reading to make that clear. So just keeping in mind that as long as you're consistent and it's readable and clear, the formatting is correct. And if you follow some of those guidelines, that's kind of industry standard as of now. It could shift in the future. Just reading other people's scripts and getting an idea of that. For example, what we had here, the Fruitvale Station, Atlanta, and Uncut Gems scripts would be great to look at to see how text or speech can pop off the page, how you should make strong use of phone calls and texting, how to make that clear. And then with Uncut Gems, that's a script where characters are talking over each other, interrupting each other, but it still remains coherent, consistent, easy to digest. These are all great works of TV and feature writing. So good idea to dive into it anyway. Some other resources are StorySense, Studio Binder, and then screenwriting.io if you want to look online. Besides that, books like The Screenwriter's Bible or The Hollywood Standard would be great to look at in terms of formatting and style. Some other writing activities that I suggest are to read only the dialogue in your script and see if just the dialogue tells the story. Here's the thing is, you don't really want it to, right? Because dialogue is considered expositional when the characters just share all the information, right? When they tell us a story, we're not learning enough through visual cues. We want more subtext. We want people to be quiet when they can, because cinema is a very visual storytelling medium. So whenever you can, tell it through a visual. Another activity you can try is to hide all the characters' names and cover them up, and then just read their dialogue. So when your script has characters that are really well written, the dialogue should belong to them and them alone. It should only be, only Chris would say this line. No one else would say this line. That's the impression you want to get when you cover the character names. It also helps you test out how your voice differentiates itself between your characters, how they speak differently, if there's a vernacular shift, a syntax shift, if the character swears and another character never would swear. Something to try out when you're trying to beef up and strengthen your dialogue. So, something to keep in mind, this workshop was brought to you by the Writing Center. For peer feedback on all types of writing, any stage of the process, including screenplays. A lot of us actually are in the film school, so we can definitely have a look at your dialogue, formatting, any issues you're having with the script. You can meet us online or in person, and the best way to make an appointment is through My LMU, and then academics, and then clicking writing and course tutoring. So that's all I have for today. I hope it was helpful, and feel free to check out our other webinars for other help with your screenplays or any other kind of writing. Thanks.